So Rob and I did this, took this trip. I'm just going to try and get this out of the way there so I don't see it. So Rob and I took a trip back in April of 2019. It was a 12-day tour, and it was organized by a company out of Portugal. And we had happened to meet the owner of the company at a birding festival in San Diego. And so that gave us an opportunity to find out about what this would be. And we decided to go on this trip. And then we spoke with our friends, Don and Ray from Winnipeg, and they joined us on the trip. The image that you see on the right side, this rooster is the national symbol of Portugal. It's called the Barcelos rooster, and it has some meaning for faith, honesty, justice, and luck. So when Anne asked me if I would do this, she said, "Now, why Portugal? Like, why would somebody go to Portugal to bird?" Well, there are a number of reasons here. First of all, it's very small. You could probably fit 2 or 3 Portugals inside of Alberta. It's only 218 kilometers wide and about 561 kilometers long. There's quite a good diversity of habitat and birds. Lisbon is in southern Portugal, and within half an hour of that, there's lovely estuary and nature reserves. Over to the southeast, about an hour, there's Alentejo area with a big nature park there. And then 45 minutes to the south on the only real highway, like sort of high-speed highway, you get to the Algarve. And that's a major flyway from Africa. And so there's migrating species that go in both directions at different times of the year. There's all kinds of protected wetlands there. And then Portugal's a very old country, and there are all kinds of cultural sites as well. So we flew into Lisbon. You can get there. We flew to Toronto from Calgary, and then there's a direct Air Canada flight to Lisbon. Lisbon is known as a city of 7 hills. The only area in Lisbon that's flat is down by the river. Everything else is on a hill and moves, angles down towards the river. Is somebody not muted? Okay. This is some of the architecture is very old. This is right in the central area. There's a river, the Tejo River, runs right along the north side of Lisbon, and there's Rob standing there. This is where ships were launched. This was a huge navigational area. All kinds of explorers left from this port. This is one of the areas that we stopped in for lunch one day. They had all kinds of different high-end restaurants would have their little kiosks, and we had a lovely lunch there one day. Port wine is very famous in Portugal. We actually went to the city of Porto at the end of the trip, and you can see the price of some of these bottles of wine. Like here's one on the left, it's over 1,390 euros. That's quite expensive for a bottle of port. Their national pastry is this cream custard tart, and we had those many times, really, really lovely. One day we were walking along the river and we came to a crosswalk, and we thought this was a great sign, pushing to reset the world. Down by the river, all kinds of gulls. So black-headed gulls, and when we see black-headed gulls here, we're sort of thinking Franklin's and Bonaparte's, but they actually have a gull that's called a black-headed gull. There's yellow-legged gulls. Lesser black-backed, which we get occasionally here as variants. Sanderlings, which we see on occasion as well here. Lisbon has all kinds of parks, and the very first day we got there, we walked to this park, and I was so excited to see these black swans, just lovely looking birds. And then I found out that they were introduced species. Peacock introduced as well, and common wood pigeon, which isn't introduced, but it's quite an impressive looking bird. Little park with the pool, pond. This garden in Lisbon, the Gulbenkian garden, and we actually saw the only common firecrest that we saw on the entire trip there, and Eurasian jay. So this is how our trip went. We started in, as you can see, we started in Lisbon. Actually, let's just look at the whole peninsula first. So if you want to try and think about where Portugal is, it's part of the Iberian Peninsula, and Spain has the largest portion of that. So it's just a small, narrow area. And as you can see, Lisbon is in this area here. And our trip basically, we started off, when we arrived, we had 3 nights in Lisbon at the beginning, and then the highlighted areas are where we stayed. So we went across the Tejo River up to this El Cochete area, and then we went across over into Alentejo, and that goes through Evora and then down to Metala. And then we went down to the coast, down to Tavira, and this area is called the Algarve. And this is where a lot of people go. They're lovely beaches, and it's a very popular destination for tourists. And then across the coast to Sagres, but we were staying in Tavira here, so we did day trips out into different areas. And then we ended up going back up to Lisbon, spending our last 2 nights in Lisbon on the tour. And then we did a post-tour trip. Rob and I took the train up to Porto and met some friends and went up the Douro River, and I'll talk about that a bit later as well. So this first section, when we were in El Cochete, so Tejo is the name of the river in Portuguese, and Tagus is what it's called in English. So it's the same river though. It's quite a long river. It goes all the way up into Spain. And they have a nature reserve there. So there were all kinds of waterfowl. So great cormorant, Eurasian spoonbills, delightful birds to see. Common greenshank, a small wader, shorebird. The black-winged stilt is very similar to our black-necked stilt, behaves the same, similar body size, quite elegant bird. Different plovers. The one on the left there is a common ringed plover. So these would be related to some of the plovers that we have, and you can see there on the right is the Kentish plover. It's handy that they were both there on the same time. Now this is, I didn't take very many video clips on the entire trip, but here's one here, and there is some talking over it, but this is a flock of dunlin coming in. So I don't know about you, but I've never seen that many dunlin before. I'm going to play that once more because I think it's really neat. And then we had, so there's a lot of water in this area on these reserves. So greater flamingo, cattle egret. Some of you may have seen those in other parts of North America. Purple heron. This is a large heron. It's very distinct. When you see it fly, it looks quite dark, but the shape of the neck is different than the other herons that we see. Squawko heron is a small heron. It's about the same size as a green heron, if you've ever seen one of those. One of the really interesting things about squawko heron is that when they fly, they look totally white. And so you can see when it's there on the reeds that it doesn't look white. It's got that rufusy brown color. Crested lark. Oh, what a gorgeous wee bird. Just delightful. And then we've got Eurasian skylark. It was always handy when they perch because then you could get a better shot. And Sardinian warbler, really pretty bird. European stonechat, that one had just caught some kind of a bird, an insect of some kind. And one of my favorite birds on this entire trip was the Eurasian hoopoe, and you're going to see a few more shots of that. It's just a gorgeous bird. We've actually had an opportunity to see one of those. A relative of that, there's an African hoopoe that we've seen in Tanzania. This one is got slightly different coloring, but it looks pretty similar. White stork. This is the first stork that we'd seen on our trip, and we'll see a lot more as we get down further south into Portugal. Black-winged kite. So there's a black kite and a black-winged kite, and this guy's a little smaller, very fierce bird. Booted eagle is one of their larger eagles, and you can see that this one had flown off and it has prey that it caught from a field, and we watched it swoop down, get the prey, and then take off over this structure. Black kite. And pallid harrier, another really lovely bird. Eurasian kestrel. These birds, there were several kestrels that we saw. They don't have the same markings as our kestrel, but the flight patterns is quite similar. If you can see in the center of this shot, this is a marsh harrier that was flying over this area. And down here on the edge of the water are the swamp hens. And these are all black-winged stilts. So they're all lifting up as the harrier's flying by, looking for its next meal. So then we left Alentejo area, or we left the area north of Lisbon, and drove in a van. It was a very comfortable van. There were 6 of us plus our guide, and we had an extra seat and lots of space for luggage. So we drove down to Évora, and this is the capital of the Alentejo region. And this is where we got our first guide, who was not our birding guide. We had 3 guides on the entire trip, and that was all part of our fee. So we picked up our first guide in Évora and did a walking tour. And this is a Judas tree. And the very interesting thing about it is that the flowers appear before the leaves. And the legend behind this is that Judas hung himself from this type of tree, and the tree was so shamed because of Judas that the flowers blushed and they had turned from white to pink. And so this is, you see these trees throughout the area, and they're really quite lovely in April. The guide took us to Almendres Cromlech, and this is a really interesting area. These are megalithic enclosures, these big stones. They were built or laid down sometime in the 6th to the 4th millennium BC. And it was Neolithic communities across Western Europe. And there's a whole area through Alentejo where these are. And they're quite large, and it was really stunning. And there were a few birds around as well. And then we went to the Roman Temple of Évora. So there's been a lot of history with different cultures coming up into the southern part of Portugal. Évora itself is quite an interesting spot. They had dancers in the city plaza. There's a big chapel, the Royal Church of St. Francis, and inside the church, there's this one area, this chapel, and it's called Chapel of the Bones. And it was constructed in the 16th century by Franciscan monks. And around the area of the church, there were these 43 different cemeteries. And so they wanted to make a statement that, you know, you needed to listen to what was going on in the church and be supplicant. And so they dug up these bones, and so they constructed from about 5,000 bodies, they constructed this chapel. So the entire chapel is bones. It's quite, it's a bit macabre. It's quite amazing. The other thing that we saw in Évora were shops where they sold cork. And cork is one of the natural trees in Portugal. They are used for the production of cork. Portugal is, I think they produce 52% of the world's cork, and it's a totally renewable resource. So this is what the cork tree looks like. And when it gets to be 25 years, they have workers who come along and they use a special tool and they strip the bark off the tree. And then they put down the age, the year that that was done. So this would have been in 2016. And every 9 years, they can harvest the tree again. So from the time the tree is 25 until its life ends around 150 to 200 years, you can imagine the number of harvests that each tree would have. And it's very sustainable. They use the cork in construction of homes, clothing, furniture. The cork shops were just amazing. So in that area, we did, of course, some birding, and woodchat shrike was the bird. So we have shrikes here, but this is a different one. The red kite and a carrion crow was following after it, probably to see if it could get any food. We didn't see black kites very often perched, but in this shot here, there's 2 of them on that branch. Short-toed snake eagle. This is a fairly compact bird, fairly narrow tail. It's a good bird to see. Now this is, we were driving along, and this is one of the reasons why it's a very good idea to get a guide when you go to a place like this. You might think you can drive around and you know, just see things, but here we are driving along, and our guide elder said, well, we're going to stop here at this, I think it's an old quarry, and on the other side of the quarry, take a look and see if you can find this. And all the way on the other side of that quarry, so here, that's what we're looking at. Eurasian eagle owlets. It was actually really hard to find them. And then it was even very difficult to take a shot. And then we also saw one of the adults, and it was perched, maybe 20 feet away. You can see on in a nest with the overhang, very well protected. So going back here, like, I think that's amazing that, I mean, he knew where it was, he knew how to show us. It was great. Then we went on to Mertila, and this is a city that's, it's not that large, it's only got about 7,000 people. It's right on the, Diane, I actually practiced pronouncing this. It's Guayana River. And this river is about 700 kilometers long. It starts up in the mountains and it divides Portugal and Spain. And so when you're in Mertila, you can look across from certain areas and you can actually see Spain. And it runs right down to the coast. There's an ancient a roadway with the bridge that goes over the river. This is the hotel we stayed at, the Hotel Musu. It was on the edge of a river, fairly modern looking. However, when you went into the lobby and looked down, there was a plexiglass covering over the floor. And this is excavated ruins below that. And they're not, they have very strict laws on historical structures, and you're not allowed to just dig them up and get rid of them and build something new. So this is how you can see what's right underneath the lobby of this hotel. Right from our hotel, we had a number of birds. European goldfinch was one of them. Fairly common bird, although we didn't see it all that often. We did a drive out sort of north and into the big park that's Mertila is in, this Guayana park. And we saw this little bustard, and this is a male, just a stunning bird. And I have a small video clip. Once again, there's some talking over top of this, and right at the end of the clip, you'll actually hear this clicking sound, which is the sound that the bird is making. There, so just before the 200, there was a little clicking sound. That was the bird. You see how it put its neck down and made that little click. And then, fortunately, we got to see the great bustard as well, not just the little bustard. Another bird that we got to see in this area was little owl. Little owl, you might, like it's actually, it's called little owl, but it's actually larger than our northern saw-whet owl. So it's not super little, but anyway, we were fortunate to see them, I think in 3 or 4 different locations on the trip. And every time we saw them, they were always very camouflaged. Common buzzard, booted eagle, Benelli's eagle. This isn't a really common bird, but we were fortunate to see them. Short-toed snake eagle. You can probably guess what they eat. There's another hoopoe. Just love it with the colors and the lichen and everything there. And great spotted cuckoo. That was a really good find. They're not that plentiful, so it was wonderful to see that bird. So this is our second shrike of the trip, the Iberian gray shrike. And they have a number of different swallows and martins. So here's a barn swallow. Blue rock thrush, we actually saw the male and the female in the same area, and this was just below, if you recall that bridge that was shown in the picture, the big bridge going across the river, this was in a valley just before that. And in the same area, up on the wall, we saw a kestrel, and it's very difficult to tell the difference between lesser or common kestrel. It's only the length of the wings that, and I couldn't tell the difference on this one. Western black-eared wheatear, we saw both male and female, that bird. And so when we're out in that area and you're looking across the landscape, this is this valley in this Guayana National Park. So you can see it's very scrubby, it's hilly, quite dry. And these are 2 of the most colorful birds we saw, the European bee-eater and the European roller. The bee-eater, we actually had 3 or 4 of them on a wire at the same time, and it was just was very exciting to see them there. And collared pratincoal, this is another favorite bird of mine. They're a wading bird, so a type of shore bird. We saw 3 of them in this area where this one was, and then one of them flew up. And like if you didn't know, I mean, this bird to me, when you see it fly, I mean, I just thought that was it was stunning. We also have more terns, the gull-billed tern and sandwich tern. And cattle egret, that one has something, a lizard or something in its mouth. And now we're getting into this area where we're seeing storks. Storks, this is the white stork, and they have a lot of history. They've, people have thought for years they're connected to fertility, good luck. The white stork is about between 3 and 3 3/4 feet tall. Back in 1995, in the Algarve area, there were only 1,000 that were reported, and 20 years later, there's over 14,000 of them. They're a protected species. They used to migrate to sub-Saharan Africa, but now they're staying in the area. They even have some that nest on cliffs around the water, but they nest on all kinds of structures. They're quite voracious, and the farmers aren't particularly keen on them because there's so many of them, and they just they ravage the fields. They go after anything that's moving practically. One of the reasons that our guide told us they had become more frequent or populous was because there had been some shrimp brought over on a boat from, I guess, I think he said from Louisiana, and they ended up becoming an invasive species in the area. And then the storks came, and there was plenty of food for them in addition to the food that they could get from the fields. Now, there's a really interesting thing that happens, though, in these stork nests. There's a sort of symbiotic relationship here, because you've got this nest, and down here, there's these holes that have been made by Spanish sparrows. So they're nesting down here underneath the stork nest. And these look a lot like our house sparrows. So then we, remember we were in Myrtilla for 3 nights, and we ended up doing some tours there as well. This particular structure here is now a Christian church, but it had gone through several reiterations, from a Roman temple back to a mosque, and then a Christian church, and all of the everything, there are all kinds of conversions within the church, but there's still bits that are left from the past. Oh, and by the way, this is the hotel we stayed in, so it's down the hill with the pool there. From where we stayed. There's all kinds of excavation going around as well. So we did these driving trips, or we went from Myrtilla down to the Algarve, and there were all kinds of water areas along the way. So we had common snipe, and just like we have here with our stilts and our avocets hang out together, you can see the black-winged stilt here in the back with these 2-pied avocets. And some of these water areas that we were in salt marshes. Common pochard reminded me a little bit of our redhead duck, red-crested pochard. And on this particular lake, there were grebe nests, and these are great crested grebes. And we saw a total of 8 great crested grebes at this lake, and they were displaying and doing courtship. You can see this one with the feathers all out in the displaying behavior. And then there were a pair that were nesting. So you can see there's the nest, floating nest, just like we see with redneck grebes, for example. With eggs in the nest, and there's the grebe right on the nest. Western swamp hen. And you may not have noticed, but there's a turtle there in front of the swamp hen. And then it was pretty exciting to see little grebes, a bird that I hadn't heard of before. Gray heron. Gray herons are just, they're not much smaller than our great blue heron. And you could easily confuse them. Greater flamingos. Common shelduck, quite an attractive bird. Alpine swift, there are a variety of swallows and swifts. This one was particularly, we'd see several of them soaring overhead and you try and figure out which one it was. Now, there were a number of different flocks of birds that we saw migrating. One of them was the European whimbrel. And these birds nest down along the coast in the western coast of Africa, and they migrate up across the water. And so you'd see flocks. So in April, they're migrating, and they would go right up to the tundra and the taiga area. So it's a long journey, and they would stop over after they'd cross the water. They'd stop over, refuel, and then carry on. Glossy ibis, so a relative of our white-faced ibis, I would assume. And here's another shot of a little owl. We were staying in Tavira in the Algarve, and this was right near our hotel. And so every day that we left the hotel and came back, we always looked for this little guy. Very camouflaged. It would be for me anyway. I know John Anderson could probably spot this bird, but it was a challenge. Red-legged partridge. Now these aren't particularly good photos, but they're record shots for me of woodlark and feckless lark. Now another flock of birds we saw migrating, these lesser blackback gulls. And then we made our way all the way over to the southwest point in continental Europe, and that's called Cabo de São Vicente. Big cliffs. You can look out to the west, to the south. It was extremely windy. We saw gannets, northern gannets flying by. It was also cold because it was windy. Yellow-legged gull flying by. And then we left that just away from the point. We drove through this area and we came across these red-billed choughs. And they really do have red bills. So remember, we're staying in Tavira, so we drove back along the Algarve to Tavira, and you can see the beautiful color of the water and a marina dock area. This is one day. The meals on our trip were just fantastic. This is our guide here, Elder. And his name is spelt with an H, but you pronounce it Elder. And we were calling him Helder for quite a while before we finally figured it out. But he knew all of the restaurant owners. He knew all the areas. And Portuguese, some of you may speak Portuguese or know it. It's different than Spanish, and we found it challenging. It was a good thing that we had Elder because he obviously was right at home. He's in his 30s and born in just north of Lisbon, and as a young family, just a really good birder and just a fine person. So we had great food. One of the dishes that we had most frequently was fish. Cod is a real common fish there. They say that they have over 1,000 ways to cook cod, and we had several of them. It was lovely. Then we did see in that area, we saw Iberian magpie, and that's an endemic bird to Portugal and Spain. And the great spotted woodpecker. That wasn't an easy bird to find, but we were really glad that we saw it. Common house martin, this was right on the hill, down on the ground below the hill where we were staying. And you can see they're collecting mud for their nests, and they build nests very similar to our cliff swallows. Cattle egrets and little egrets. And black-bellied plover and ruddy turnstone, so birds that we see here too. So at this point, we're leaving the south, and we're starting to go back up north. And this is a spot that we went to on 3 separate locations, Nossa Senhora de Arcelius, and it's a chapel on the hill. And it has a great viewpoint. And this is a video clip that Rob took on his phone. And you'll see it's a panorama shot. And off to the right, you'll see there's a couple of hills. And the raptors would fly over, and they get the thermals from these hills. And that's where we would see the raptors go by. And we saw a number of different species there. But what we were really looking for, you'll see shortly. So there are the hills on the right now. And what we were looking for was Eurasian griffons. And we had looked for them the other 2 times that we were there and hadn't seen them. And that time there was a kettle of 9 of them. So we were very, very excited and rewarded for having, with elders' persistence and going back again. So now we're driving back towards Lisbon, and we have the Sardinian warbler and western yellow wagtail. And one final stop before we got back to Lisbon, and we saw black-crowned night herons. And I believe they're just like the ones we have here. I'm not 100% sure, but I think so. So we got back to Lisbon, and here we had a guided tour. So that day we got up, and you can see there's fog over the Tejo River, and we got a ride up. Remember, Lisbon's built on these hills, so we got a ride up to the top of the hill, one of the hills, and then we started making our way down. So if you look down, you can see all of these structures are built on the hill, and they're tiled roofs. As we're walking down, there's stairways that go down, like passages, and there's all kinds of art and as you're going along. This was one apartment that we passed by that had window boxes or planters, and these are old jeans, and they had planted plants in them. And the little roadways, they're all quite narrow, and they're all cobbled stone that has been hand laid. We went into this monastery on the tour. And this is where Vasco da Gama's tomb is, and he had established a sea link from Portugal to India. And one of the art areas that we looked at had this great piece of art. street art is a very, very popular thing. Lisbon is known for it. This particular artist here, Bordello II, makes all of his street art on these walls out of trash. He has a number of different pieces around the city. This area here, just gonna, there's a funicular that goes up here, and the area is called, it's the Gloria Funicular, and it's a whole street art gallery all the way along the walls. And then Ray and Dawn here, this is funicular, they're deciding to give it a little push because it had stopped. We also visited this bookstore. It's the oldest bookstore in the world, 1732. It was destroyed in an earthquake in, I think it was 1765, and they rebuilt it, relocated it just a little way from where it was. This Belém Tower, it's the Tower of St. Vincent, and it was built in the 16th century. And it was a gateway to Lisbon. So it was the point of embarkation and disembarkation for all of the Portuguese explorers. So it's really a landmark. This other structure is a lot newer. It was built in 1940, and it marked the 500 years since Henry the Navigator's death. So Henry the Navigator was the one who did a lot of the work on the exploration. So then our tour ended, and we took a train. Rob and I went up to Porto to meet up with some friends there. Porto is on the Douro River. It's famous for port wine. They have, for centuries have made wine, and they'd float the casks and the boats down the Douro River. So as we're going up the Douro, we had rented a vehicle. It had 6 gears, and Heike, our friend, and Rob were the drivers. And Rob had never used 6 gears before. He's used to 5, but not 6. So that was a little bit tricky. The roads are very steep and windy on the edge of these hills. These are all terraced hills. So here's the Douro River down here, with all these vineyards planted all along the hills. You can see the windy road. So you'd be driving along, and then like all these switchbacks. This is the town that we stayed in, Regua. Driving along, we had to stop for the local goats going by. One of the many lunches that we had. This is a look at the Douro River. And this is a river boat. People take river cruises, and they go up the Douro. So we actually went on a river boat, but it was just I think it was an hour and a half long. We went up the river and then back down. But the great thing about that was that we saw a booted eagle and Montague's harrier from the boat, as well as a black kite and a red kite. Back at our hotel, we had black redstart and European greenfinch, and another Eurasian hoopoe. And this was right on the wires by our hotel. This was, they give you a glass of wine when you get on the boat. It was lovely. We did get a chance to go to a few wineries and places where they make port. So we went to Sandeman And this is the view from from their structure. So in summary, we saw 166 species on our eBird checklist. Our guide kept track of the birds, and so it was really handy. He shared the checklist at the end of the trip. And in just the group that we went with, Birds and Nature Tours Portugal, they do tours not just in Portugal, but they do them in Spain as well. João is the owner of the company, and our guide was Elder. And those are the websites and email address if you ever wanted to contact them. But I would say, I know that Ray and Dawn did another follow-up trip, and we're quite happy as well with the guide that they had. I think that's it, Anne.
Great. Well, thank you, Diane.